I didn't come to guitar making from a conventional route, as you can probably see from the guitars, but I came from the art school route. So I basically was surrounded by a lot of different influences when I was working and coming up with design ideas. Furniture makers, jewellery makers, fine artists, everything. I went through a sort of 5-year period of art school, from foundation through to a master's in product design. And I just absorbed a lot of different influences along the way. And I guess the tubular thing is the thing that obviously stands out about my guitars. And that came from really seeing furniture makers using mild steel tube and shaping it to make chairs and so on when I was at college. And I wondered if I could use that to create instruments, because up to that point, when I got to college, I'd been making instruments for quite a while. I started when I was about 14 making basses and different instruments that I played in my own bands. And I'd always had a love for the instrument. So when I took my design education, I wanted to steer it towards guitar making if I could. And I was fortunately able to do that. So yeah, there I was at college. This is Wolverhampton University, as it now is, back in the early 90s, absorbing those tubular steel influences. And I made a series of guitars which I called Gitubes, which were mild steel tube shaped up into a kind of framework. And I was lucky enough to get an 8-string bass that I built, 8-string Gitube. Seal used it for a video this would be back in about 91. And it was a killer video. It was actually the first video that they shot on blue screen. So it was kind of a breakthrough video at the time, and it's a great track, obviously. And he used the bass, and that got me a bit of exposure and got me to thinking that there might be something in this, maybe I could make a business out of this. But I still had a couple of years to go doing my master's in product design. So I kind of took that chance to develop the ideas a bit more. I went off to the States actually over the summer, and I visited as many guitar makers as I could all the way up the West Coast. So all the way from Sonoma up in California, Northern California, where there's a maker called Steve Klein who does some beautiful work. And then I went to see Fender, John Page, and a range of different makers, just to try and get just to absorb influences from that side of the industry, the conventional guitar industry. And then I came back and I did a 2-year master's in product design, where I was able to steer my projects towards guitar making. And I'd come into it with these tubular steel creations, these Gitubes. And I realised through the course of the development of those, really, that they were pretty much sculptural pieces. They didn't really function in the way that I wanted the guitar to function. They had a very particular kind of sound that I knew probably wouldn't be accepted. So I then started to look at different materials, and carbon fibre caught my eye, because this is back in the early 90s. It was a kind of coming onto the scene. Formula One cars, mountain bikes, tennis rackets were starting to use this sort of wonder material. And I just wondered if I could use it for guitars. So I did a few experiments and started to realise the properties it had got. And at this time, I was also doing some work with the University of Birmingham into the science of materials. And I was using a thing called a spectrum analyzer to analyse the different frequencies that you get from different materials. And I looked at different woods, a whole range of things, from concrete, metal, plastics. And it was fascinating, actually, to see the different constituents of the sound that were present within the different materials were promoting. So anyway, it was all part of the package which went into me using these slightly more unusual materials. So the carbon fibre teamed up with the tubular steel, which had come from my earlier designs. So the first instruments I made using carbon fibre were basically solid chord instruments with a lot of resin in them. They had the carbon fibre kind of structure, but again I realised it wasn't a tone which was going to be acceptable. So I started looking at using combinations of materials, woods and carbon together, which is what I've ended up doing. And in many ways it's not actually a new technique, because some of the earliest luthiers were using this technique of veneering softwood instruments way back in the Middle Ages. So you had, or medieval times anyway, you had kind of lutes with softwood cords and ebony veneering on the surface. So they realised back then that you had the beauty of the tone wood, but encasing it in a stiffer, more structurally solid material did something for the sound as well as for the physics of the construction as well. So it's just a modern interpretation of that, really. So I kind of shy away a bit from saying carbon fibre because people have got a lot of preconceptions about what the material is and what it does. For guitar making, it's certainly for bass, it seems to be more in the bass arena than in the guitar arena. But I always say they're really wooden guitars, but they're carbon fibre reinforced. So it's a wooden chord instrument, and I'm using a very lightweight tone wood, cedar, western red cedar, sometimes Cidrella, Brazilian cedar, which is a little bit denser for the neck maybe. And then it's overlaid, or it's done in a mould actually, so it's laid in, a skin of carbon fibre over the whole surface, which gives you a range of different qualities. So you get an extra stiffness, you get a degree of string-to-string clarity from the instrument that you don't get from purely wood, and a nice resonance. It really rings on because the structure is quite stiff. So they're good qualities to have from a tone point of view, but physically as well, it makes the guitar very strong. It's very resistant to temperature change and so on. And it allows you to do things that you might not necessarily do with wood. Because it's a moulded structure, you can do things with the shaping of the neck into the body that would be perhaps a touch risky with wood on its own, because you can rely on the fact that carbon fibre is going to give you a lot of strength. So this instrument, this is my standard G1 vibrato. It's actually a piezo model in that it's got piezo elements in the bridge as well, but they're really a blank canvas. I mean, the G1 shape is fixed in that that's a moulded structure. I can vary things like the neck depth and the fingerboard radius and guitar-y things that make a guitar very personal, but the actual shape of the instrument is fixed. But then they're all built to custom order, so a customer will have different preferences, maybe for pickups, configuration. I like to use my own pickups, which are a tubular pickup design using an Alnico bar magnet, which I have Aaron Armstrong wind for me. And then I sometimes combine it with circuits, but they're mostly passive, the guitars. From an aesthetic point of view, this is just a personal preference, but I don't really like lever switches, so I wanted everything to look very bespoke. So the idea with these is that I make all the hardware by hand. I've got a lathe, old 1968 Chipmaster lathe, good bit of British engineering, and I turn all the metal components on the guitar. So everything from the guitar knobs, all the parts for the tube, basically the vibrato bridge, all the pickup parts, everything I make by hand, and then I hand polish it in the workshop, and I send it off for chroming or gold plating sometimes. But the idea with the selector was that I wanted it to be a rotary selector, which I partly because I like to keep the continuity of the look of the knobs, but it allows you to do things that you can't necessarily do with just a lever as well. So here on this one, this is a 6-way rotary, so it can do all the things that you might get on a normal 3 single coil guitar, but it can also do like an outside coil sound, so you get that extra kind of hollowness. And then combining that with a push-pull switch on the volume allows you to bring in maybe the mid-coil, so you can get a fatter combination sound. So you can get about 9 sounds out of 3 pickups. So it makes it a very versatile instrument. Yeah, that's what the rotary switch does.